Joining me now is Sky News contributor Kosha Gator. Kosha, let's start with border czar Tom Homan. He's got his sights set on Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. No, he doesn't want to deport her. She is a US citizen after all, but her attempts to help illegal immigrants evade authorities may see her charged by the Department of Justice. AOC has been pushing a webinar claiming that ICE raids are political tactics that are intended to create fear. And this webinar also encourages migrants not to open their door if federal agents come knocking. That seems unwise, Kosha, unwise.
It does, and Tom Homan does not come across as the kind of guy you want to mess with, and she has sparred with him before, and there's this viral congressional hearing from last year, 4 years ago maybe, where she was doing a different version of the same thing. But whether it's her doing this, we saw Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey a few weeks ago blatantly saying that he's housing an illegal on top of his garage, and I dare the feds to come in, and others like that. It's really interesting. It shows that they're so comfortable with flouting immigration law, which has gone on forever and a day in America, and they obviously believe that they're beyond reproach. So he is suggesting that the DOJ go after people like this, elected representatives that are suggesting the flouting of the law. I don't know if they will do that, but you never know. You make an example of one person in some way, and it might deter others from taking a similar tactic.
Well, it seems unwise politically as well. We know AOC and the squad, they're to the very far left of the Democrats, but really they have set the agenda, it seems, for some time. But the Democrats can read the polls. They know these programs to control illegal immigration, the deportations, controlling the crisis at the border, they're popular. So why would they want to highlight not just their failures in opening the floodgates, but also just signal to the rest of the country that we're okay with this. We're in fact facilitating this.
It's a good point. They seem to be behind the curve now that they're out in the wilderness and have been defeated after really holding on to every institution and being on the winning side for so long. It sounds like they don't know how to actually be on the losing side and read the room. And you're right that the public support for this has shifted so dramatically. Just even 10 years ago, it looked nothing like this. Now it's something like 59 to 60% of people support all illegals, not just the violent criminal offenders, but all illegals being deported. That is new. That the American electorate has consolidated around this issue, and they seem to be stuck in a different decade, and they haven't caught up to this reality.
The Trump administration keeps saying if you enter the country illegally, by definition, you're a criminal. You've broken our immigration laws, so you have to go. Now, let's talk a little bit about NATO. It's looking like a major political realignment is underway, and it's a win for the Trump administration. European countries in the NATO alliance have agreed to step up their defence spending after President Trump's request that they increase the number to 5% of GDP. Here is NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte.
Really, Europe is now stepping up. Last week, I was a bit disappointed that Europeans were saying, hey, we also have to be at the table, and why are we not there? And they're now really starting to dialogue, to strategize how they can support the peace effort. And that is important. By now, we are spending 700 billion more on the European side of NATO than before President Trump came into office. It is absolutely still not enough. We have to do much, much more.
It's not enough. We have to do much more. This is after they've boosted spending significantly. And it's precisely what the US was pushing for. Again, a lot of people seem to deliberately misunderstand Donald Trump's strategy, what his goals are here. He doesn't want to weaken NATO. He wants NATO members to actually spend their money and not have just America carrying the load.
It's a continuation of what he campaigned on even the first time and even before he entered politics. And the secretary over there actually has credited Trump in the past, where he said, you know, nobody ever asked us to pay up to our obligations before Trump. He did, so we're doing it. And something like 8 nations were delinquent and were not even meeting their obligations, which at the time was 2 to 3%. Now they're raising the obligation. This is what Trump Advance and Pete Hegseth have been pushing over that conference and in other venues as well, to 5%. And in the 60s, that's where it was. It was around a little over 4%, what the EU was paying in the wake of the Cold War and that era. And now it's down to 1 to 2%. So that is kind of the point. 80 years post World War II, how long should America be the guarantor of security, subsidizing all sorts of other programs as a result of that in Europe, as well as what are we defending? That was the J.D. Vance speech that went viral, when they're not even acting like democracies in some ways, with censorship and canceling elections and all of that. So this is a watershed moment, and it's a big shift from post-World War II.
I'll be talking with Josh Hammer later in the program about that J.D. Vance speech. I've listened to it a couple of times now. I also listened to his full speech in Paris a day or so earlier. His clarity is astonishing. The way he covered these major points in 18, 19 minutes, he didn't even seem to be looking at any notes. He didn't seem to be reading from an auto cue. And it was just crystal clear where the US stands, where its values are, and what it expects from Europe. He wasn't necessarily making demands, though, Kosha. He was just telling them, this is happening under your watch, and it's disturbing, especially when he was talking about the suppression of free speech and the way the concerns of everyday citizens have been disregarded.
Mm-hmm. And that's the other piece of it. So part of it is, the first layer is the spending and having some sort of level playing field in terms of spending obligations, as we discussed. But the second thing is much deeper, which is that the shared alliance between European societies and American societies post-World War II was that, some of these tenets of free societies, freedom of speech, and other issues that he raised. And if they're no longer abiding by that, then his point is that's almost like a double whammy, that we're overpaying for your security and we're paying to defend a society that's kind of lost its way in terms of censoring its own citizens. And you're right, he did not mince words, he was rather blunt.
He was blunt, but it was a message that they need to hear, and it's a message that we've spoken about on this program. I have Douglas Murray on every week. He wrote, about a decade ago about the strange death of Europe. Mm-hmm. This is a phenomenon that has been commented on by intellectuals brave enough to state the obvious, and yet the Europeans were just appalled or shocked that anybody would dare speak these home truths to them.
It's a new day, and that's also the difference between Trump 47 versus 45, where everybody around him really is singing from the same song sheet, and they genuinely believe in that vision, the populist America First worldview, and that's why they can speak with such clarity, whereas last time he was sort of battling people internally, and then the message that would be communicated externally wasn't always aligned the way it is now.
And he's getting his people thus far through. So he's had Tulsi now, RFK Jr., Kash Patel is one of the big ones that we're waiting for a vote there. But how do you see that administration coming together? Because it is very different from that first Trump term, where he almost was prioritising DC experience over loyalty, over competence. Mm-hmm. They weren't necessarily his people, and it showed because there was a lot of disunity and disloyalty there. Mm-hmm. How do you see this going? I know it's only been 4 weeks, but it seems to be a very systematic, methodological approach he's had to getting his people into key positions.
100%. Like Trump 2.0 seems like night and day compared to 1.0, where there, he was experienced in other realms, but so new to DC, and that was so evident, where he was relying on recommendations from other people and didn't really know what he was doing in terms of personnel. He's mentioned that himself. Versus now, I feel like that whole 4-year term and the amount of heat he took, officially and unofficially, and then what happened in 2020 and the intervening 4 years has been a huge litmus test for who is truly MAGA, populist, pro-Trump, pro that America First agenda, and who isn't. And it's been a very clarifying 8 years, which has allowed him to really identify the right people this time, and he just didn't have that benefit last time, and we're seeing that with the picks and how quickly they're going.
Almost got rid of the rhinos, if you want to call them, Republican name only. The GOP is now Trump's party. There's a few still hanging on, your Mitch McConnells and a few others. Moving along, let's look at how a CNN host not only refuses to fact-check obvious, verifiable lies from Democrat Amy Klobuchar, but she reinforces those lies.
$2 trillion in tax cuts to the wealthiest and paying for it by cuts to cancer research at NIH, something that has bipartisan support for years and years, or stopping Head Start, or freezing people who are trying to protect our nuclear stockpile. I know they are, but what I'm saying is at some point the pressure is on them.
That type of hyperbole and scaremongering is just not working, and the polls are telling us that.
Indeed, it's kind of like AUC and immigration, like we talked about, that the public sentiment has shifted all the way over, and these folks don't seem to have caught up. Where these tactics used to work, where anytime anybody wants to talk about cutting spending, $32+ trillion in debt, we have to do it. You leap immediately to we're saving children from malaria in Africa, we're doing cancer research, we're helping underprivileged kids get a head start in education. Like, it's easy to point to those things and make the other side like the big bad bogeyman that's taking money away. It doesn't work anymore, and the way they're doing it with DOGE and just putting out the receipts, as they say, of how much waste, fraud, and abuse is happening, everybody's seeing it, it's disseminated all over social media, and then these tactics, I think, are going to fall flat, but that's the only playbook they know, so they're going to keep doing it.
Absolutely, and the worthwhile programs, the ones that do enjoy public support, well, they're going to be absorbed into other parts. You don't need to have USAID in existence to devote funds to those worthy projects.